Hi everyone, my name is Sulay Shah, and I'm a product manager on the Identity and Access Management Service at AWS. Today, we are going to talk about how do you scale permissions management in AWS using attribute-based access control. Now, before I begin, a quick note is that this session does cover IAM policies and permissions. So you do require some basic knowledge of what IAM is, what IAM permissions are, how do you create IAM roles, how roles work, and so on. All right, then. In this session, first I will talk about what attributes are or what attributes mean in AWS and what ABAC really means and what ABAC model does in your environment. Next, I will talk about how do you specify or author ABAC permissions and then what controls are available today for creating fine-grained ABAC permissions in your environment. Then actually I will give you a live demo of an existing AWS service where I will show you how to implement ABAC and then how get access to that service resources based on my ABAC permissions. This demo will also cover sample permissions, where I will show you how to author permissions for ABAC model, and then the user experience of what your developers will see when you have your access control based on ABAC. And finally, I will cover the ABAC best practices, which you can take with you after this session before you implement ABAC in your environment. And I will conclude by sharing some ABAC resources that you can refer before implementing ABAC in your organization. All right, then, let's begin. Attribute based access control in AWS. So, what are attributes in AWS? Attributes are nothing but tags, as some of you might know, in AWS. Tags are keys or key or value pairs you attach to a specific resource for a given service in AWS. Now, for example, you could have a cost center tag, say cost center 1234, attached to some service resource. You could have a job function tag. You could have a created by tag to indicate who created that particular resource. So you can really mix and match based on your needs and use cases before applying tags to resources in AWS. Some common examples or use cases for tags are cost allocation, discovery, and access control. And for the sake of this discussion, we will be talking about access control and how to use attributes for access control in AWS. So we already have several services in AWS today and several resources of the services that support tag on create, tag based access control, and just general tagging on resources. We also have a very robust policy language in IAM where you can go and specify permissions for your resources. And finally, we have IAM principal tagging, which we launched last year, where you can apply or attach tags to IAM users and roles for tag matching. All these three combined constitute your ABAC model in AWS. And you can use this ABAC model where you can use attributes to create general permission rules that scale with your organization. Now, let's look at some of the benefits of ABAC that you get when you apply this model in your organization. The first and the best benefit of this model is that you can scale your permissions as your organization innovates. With ABAC, it'll be easier for your developers to move fast as well because your permissions will automatically apply based on attributes. So, for example, if you're already working on your project resources and tomorrow you want to add a new resource, like say a new EC2 instance to your project resources, and if your permissions are based on attributes, then all you need to make sure is the new instance being added to your project resource has the appropriate attribute present or appropriate tag present on it. And if your ABAC or if your permissions are based on ABAC rules, then you will automatically get access to the new instance you added without requiring any updates in AWS for permissions or permission policies. This means you can now have granular permissions without requiring or asking your admins to update your permissions for every single user or resource you add. And finally, you have audit attributes available where you can determine who has access to what based on tags on resources. So, for example, if your access control attributes are cost center or job function, and if your users and if your resources already have this attribute, then you can easily say that these principals have access to this particular. All right, then let's look at some of the common examples where you can use attribute based permissions. The most common example is grant developers read write access to their project resources. Now, this is where you can say that when developers work on projects or developers are accessing their resources, if these are based on attributes, then the developers can get access to those resources only based on attributes. So they only get access to their project resources, which is where I say the attributes come into play. And if the attributes don't match, then you don't get access to the resources. Next is you require developers to assign their project to new resources. So, for example, if you're creating new project resources like adding a new EC2 instance, as I mentioned earlier, then you can force your developers to specify a tag when they actually launch or create new EC2 instances. This will make sure that any new resource created in your environment has a tag. And now, because your access control permissions are based on attributes, the permissions will automatically apply and you will get access to those resources. Grant developers read and write access to resources that are common to their team. ABAC also enables you to share resources amongst your team. At the same time, you can also share resources across teams, as long as you have the appropriate team tags or team name tags attached to resources and your permissions are based on it. And finally, you can manage only the resources that I own. So in this case, you can determine whether you get read or write access if you've created that resource. Otherwise, based on tags. Sorry, can we? Finally, you can manage only the resources that I own. So in this case, you can figure out whether somebody needs write access or read access based on the tag you've attached on that particular resource. So for example, if I'm a developer creating a new EC2 instance and I require a tag, say, created by on that instance, then I only get access for writing permissions on that particular EC2 instance. Everybody else who wants access may get read access based on some other tag because the created by tag is for me and only I get those actions to perform on that resource. Okay, so now let's look at how an ABAC model would look like in your environment if you were to implement that today. So this is a classic case of IAM users accessing resources by assuming a role in AWS. This is where I have added tags on my roles. At the same time, I've added tags on my project resource. So in this particular example, as you can see, I have three roles and there are three different identities. These could be IAM users, or these could be identities in your IDP, federating into AWS with SAML Federation and assuming these roles. So I have three roles. The first one has project red tag, second one has project green tag, third one has project blue tag. And similarly, I have project resources. And for the sake of this example, these are all EC2 instances. And I have equivalent tags on the project side. There are project red tag, project green tag, project blue tag. Now, because my permissions of the roles are based on ABAC, project uh, project red means only the roles with project red tag get access to resources of project red tag. Similarly, with the role with project green tag, they only get access to the EC2 instances of project green tag, and so on and so forth. So this is how an ABAC model would look like if you go ahead and implement it today. Now, what is the advantage of ABAC? Like, why would one do this over the traditional RBAC model, where you already have roles determined and you're giving access or fine-grained access based on fine-grained permissions? So the advantage of ABAC is that if you, for example, now require a certain role with Project Green Tag to instead have access to Project Blue's resources, this can be done very easily because the type of resources both the roles were accessing were similar. So their permissions were also similar. The only difference was they were mapping to different tags. And that's how we were differentiating between the access. So if now identities assuming the role with project tag green require access to project blue's resources, all you need to do is update the tag on the role to project blue. And this means now that role can access Project Blue's resources without having to update any permissions in AWS. Your admin can just go ahead and update the tag on the role, and they will get access immediately to the Project Blue resources. Yes, this also means that the role loses access to Project Green's resources. That can change again if you want to grant the role to uh, access or have access to Project Green resources. The next advantage is that, say tomorrow you want to add more EC2 instances to your project. This is because you want to scale. Your developers are working on this project, and there's a need to scale, need to add more capacity. So you decide to add more EC2 instances. So in this case, you are adding a new EC2 instance to the project green. So we already had two instances with project green tag, and now you're adding a third one. As long as you make sure that whenever somebody launches a new instance, it has a tag, it has the project green tag. Again, the permissions will apply automatically, and the role will automatically get access to the new instance without having to update any permissions in AWS. This is because you made sure that the new instance also has a project tag and your permissions are already based on ABAC. So the roles project tag matches the new instance project tag, and you get access to the instance immediately. All right, then. Now let's look at what kind of permissions are available for ABAC, and then what controls you can use to make sure those ABAC permissions are fine grained and fine tuned. So first, look at the permissions. By permissions, I mean what kind of access or what can you do with tags, right? So you have these actions like create tags or delete tags. These actions allow you to add or remove tags from a specific service resource. Now, every single service which supports tagging and tag-based auth in AWS today has its own APIs, which you need to add as IAM actions in the IAM permission policy. Without those permissions being there in the permission policy, your developers won't be able to perform any of the tagging actions. This just works like any other IAM policy, to do anything in AWS, you need permissions. Similarly, to add or remove tags on a specific service resource, you need those service level tagging APIs added to your permission policy, without which you can't perform those operations. So, what are those specific permissions that you need to add? So, for example, in case of EC2, EC2 has two tagging APIs, EC2 create tags and EC2 delete tags. Similarly, other services that support tagging and tag-based auth also have their own APIs. There's actually a central repository available in our AWS docs pages today, where you can go and figure out all the actions and resources and conditions for every single service and all resource types in AWS on a service by service basis. At the end of the section, or at the end of the session, I will share those resources with you, where you can quickly go and figure out what APIs are available for every single service. So these were the permissions, and now let's look at the controls. The first control that I'm going to talk about today is the AWS request tag key. Now, this is a global condition key which you add in the condition block of a permission policy. And one classic example or use case of this key is, say, if you want to require tags for a certain action. So, a few minutes ago, I said you may want to require, or you definitely want to require tags when you create a new resource. This is where you can use the AWS request tag. So, for example, if you are using the EC2 API run instances, and you want to ensure that anytime somebody does run instances, or which launches a new instance, you apply a tag, then you need to add this AWS request tag key in your condition statement, and then specify the specific tag you want the developer to attach to the resource. So, for example, you can have AWS request tag project equals green, and that means, whenever I create or launch a new instance, I have to apply project green as a tag on that instance. Otherwise, I won't be able to create it. So, very, very critical use case, which this. The next one is AWS tag keys. Now, this key is again a global condition key, so it'll work with most services. And you can add this in the condition block of your policy statement to control what kind of tag keys one can apply on a resource. By tag keys, I mean job function, cost center, user ID, based on your use cases, you can control those. So if you have a condition which says AWS tag keys, job function, cost center, user ID, and if somebody tries to add a tag to a resource by using a key which is not in this list, then that operation will be denied. That developer will only be allowed to use one of these three keys or all three keys. they're adding more than one tags on the resource they're performing. Otherwise, the action will be denied. So it's a very powerful key. This will also help you control what kind of tags float around in the environment. Because if you deny the usage of certain keys, that means essentially you're denying certain tags altogether in your environment. The third one is the AWS principal tag key, another global condition key. And this key references the tags on IAM principles, which is basically IAM users or roles. So if my IAM role has a project or cost center or user ID tag, then when I use principal tag key in my permission policy and I say principal tag user ID, it will actually reference the user ID tag on my role itself, on the calling principle. So it's a very, very powerful key, specifically used for things like tag matching when you're writing an ABAC policy. You want to make sure that your principal tag matches the tag on the resource. Only then you get access to the resource to perform whatever actions you want. And the last one is the AWS resource tag. This is basically, just like you had principal tags, which were basically referencing the tags on the principles, the resource tag will be the tag on the resource. So on the resource on which the action is being performed. So in the case of EC2, it will be the EC2 tags attached to the instance itself. Now notice I've mentioned asterisk at the end of this key. This is because not all services support the AWS prefix for this key. Some services actually use service specific prefixes. For example, EC2 has EC2 resource tag. Secrets Manager has Secrets Manager resource tag. We are also, going towards a model where we're trying to get all the services to support the AWS resource tag key, so that it becomes easier for you to author permission policies. But we're just not there yet. But in that case, if you encounter a service which doesn't support AWS resource tag, then you might have to go back and use the service specific. All right, so now let's look at how you can actually use these controls in your permission policies. So the first way you can use these controls is the classic ABAC condition, where in the condition block of your policy, you can specify if the resource tag matches the principal tag or not. Only if these two match, then you get access to the resource. Otherwise, you don't get access. And by access, I mean whatever actions you specified in the action block of your policy. So in this, if I were to write the entire policy, I'll have certain actions. The resource will be an asterisk, which is all resources, because your granular permissions are based on the condition with tag matching. So here I'm using Secrets Manager as my example. And if the project tag on a specific secret is is equal to the project tag on the calling principle, only then that principle can perform the action specified on that particular secret. If the project tag doesn't match, then the principal cannot perform those actions on that secret. It's as simple as that. Now the second use case is again the condition block, but here instead of doing tag matching, you are actually specifying the absolute value of the principal tag key. So as an example, in this particular case, I've mentioned AWS principal tag job function is systems engineer. And my if my principal doesn't have a tag job function ecosystem engineer, then the principal won't get to perform those actions on that resource. A good place where you can actually use this condition is in resource-based policy. So let's say S3 bucket policy, where you have a number of users who require access to the bucket, but only if they have a specific condition. So in this case, you can have that condition as your principal tag job function system engineer. If that is true for those users, they'll be able to access that particular bucket. Otherwise, they won't be able to access the bucket. And the last way of, the last thing that I can talk about how to use principal tag key is actually in the resource block. This is different from the first two. In the first two, we mentioned the condition block, but now you're specifying principal tag key in the resource block. This is super helpful where a service is not supporting ABAC completely. So if you're using S3 for example, and if you have 50 users who require access to their own buckets only and not other buckets, today you might have created 50 different policies because you want to make sure that the bucket names in the resource block are different. And that just becomes too much to handle because you have 50 policies. Instead, with this particular way of specifying the principal tag key, which is basically with the dollar sign, where the principal tag key now acts as a variable, you can just specify one permission policy, attach all your users, and then the principal tag bucket name can live on the user. So whenever a user tries to access their buckets, their principal tag bucket name will be evaluated in this resource block. And if the bucket names match, then the principal will get access to the bucket to perform whatever actions. Otherwise, they'll be denied. So this is also one way of using a principal tag key. Note there are other services also which support the usage of principal tag key this way, not just S3, but I just gave an example because that tends to resonate a lot with a lot of customers. Okay, so now let's look at the complete policy on how an ABAC policy would look like if you're doing the traditional tag matching scenario for granting access to resources. Now here's an example of secrets manager permission policy. For those of you who don't know what secrets manager is, it basically allows you to manage, rotate your secrets, and your secrets could be database administrator password or something of that sort. So in this particular policy, as you can see in the action block, I'm allowing a bunch of actions for secrets manager like delete secret, rotate secret, put secret value on resource star. But my condition is where all the granular permissions happen, right? Because my condition is based on if your secrets manager resource tag project matches the principal tag project, only then you get access to if the tag doesn't match, then you are denied access. So this is how your complete policy would look like for single service. Of course, in your real world use cases, you'll have multiple services. So you'll do a combination of multiple services and use the similar condition for those services. All right, so those were the permissions and controls. And now let's move on to how you actually apply ABAC in your organizations because there are much more things you need to do apart from just writing permissions to make sure you have a successful ABAC model set up. So the first step is that you want to reserve certain attributes for access control. This is very critical because you want to make sure that now, because you're using attributes for access control, they become security primitives, and you want to keep those attributes separate from your cost allocation or discovery use cases, and hence you want to make sure that you reserve a certain subset of attributes. So, for example, classic examples of attributes are job function, cost center, project, user ID are the ones that I've heard from customers who want to use these for ABAC. The next one and probably the most important one is that you want to make sure that whenever somebody creates a new resource, that resource has a tag. Without that, you're not allowed to create resources. This will ensure that your administrators don't have to go back to all your accounts and individual resources to ensure that they have tags or not. If you have authority permissions right up front to make sure that developers cannot create resources without tags, then that extra step won't be required. And the third step required from administrators in this, setting up ABAC is set permissions based on attributes. So you want to make sure that because we are working with ABAC here, your permission rules for access control are based on attributes, such that only if the attributes match, then you get access to the resource. Otherwise, you don't. So those are your three critical steps for the administrator to perform before your developers can go and access resources. Next is for your developers to actually go and create resources. And because you're requiring attributes on creation, those resources being created will be tagged. And because the resources are now tagged, your permissions will apply automatically and developers will get access to those resources. So these 5 steps together form your complete ABAC model that you want to implement. Okay, now we are going to jump on to the demo. But before that, a quick introduction to how we have set up the demo and what I'm going to go through. So I'm using 2 attributes in my demo setup. One is project automation, and the second is project integration. And the service I'm using for this demo is Amazon EC2. Notice all along I've mentioned things about EC2, so I just felt it'd be easier to continue with the same service, so that you can understand. For those who don't know ABAC, can follow along. In the first step of my demo, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to show you the role which I've already created. So as step one, I've already created this role, and the role has project automation tag already attached to it. All right, the next step is where you create your policies such that the policies are based on ABAC, and you also require tags when you create new instances. So I will show you that the project tag will be required when you launch an instance. And the other policy will be basically where I will show you that you get access to the EC2 instance only if your tag matches the tag on the EC2. And the final thing or final step is basically where I will actually show you the access, where I will assume this Amazon ABAC EC2 role with my user Bob, and I will show you that the user Bob will try to access an instance with a matching tag. It'll work. When Bob tries to access an instance without that matching tag, the access will be denied. And then I will try to update the project tag to something else and see how the permissions work and how permissions apply. All right, then let's see the demo. So as a first step in the demo, what I'll do is I will log in with my administrator account just to show you what the policies look like, because um, my user Bob doesn't have access to see the policies. So first I'll go to IAM and I will show you my users that I've created, which is user Bob. The users, I have a bunch of users here, and the one that you're going to use for this demo is Bob. And notice that Bob has no permissions right now. And the only thing that Bob can do today is assume a role in his account, because the role that I've created, ABAC EC2, allows Bob to assume that role. So that's the only action Bob can perform right now. And let's look at the role, which is the ABAC EC2 role that we'll be using for this demo. That has a couple of permissions already attached, which I created earlier today, where the first one is EC2 run instances. This policy basically forces Bob to have access, or forces Bob to add a tag when Bob launches a new instance. So quickly showing you, I'm not going to edit. Quickly showing you, I'm going to allow describe star on all resources, because I want to be able to see it in the console, and then run instances with certain runs. But then I'm going to basically say create volume and run instances only if the request tag project is present, and the request tag project is equal to principal tag project with a dollar sign. The principal tag project is basically the tag on the role, and I've already added a tag project automation on my role ABAC EC2. And notice I'm only allowing the project as a tag key, which means if I try to add any other tag, say cost center, Bob will be denied uh, from launching EC2 instance. And now let's look at the second policy. The second policy is where I'm actually going to, sorry, let me go back to roles, and let me show you the ABAC. This is where I'm doing tag matching, where you're only allowed access based on these actions. So I can only perform reboot, terminate, start, stop only if my resource tag project on the EC2 instance matches the principal tag project on my principal, which is the role. So these two policies attached to my role. And now I will log out of this administrative account, and I will show you the actual demo where I will sign as Bob, and Bob will assume the ABAC EC2 role. In the right? So now I'm logged in as Bob. Bob has no permissions. So as you can see, if I go to IAM, it'll all be denied. I won't be able to load anything. only thing that Bob can really do is Bob can assume that ABAC role. So this is my account ID, and then the role is two, switch role, switch role. Now this session is my role session. As you can see at the top, ABAC is E2. Of course, this role doesn't have any permissions to see any IAM actions. So I'll quickly switch to EC2, which is where all the actions happen. Now I already have created a couple of instances. So first I will show you, what kind of access you get based on tags, and then I will actually launch a new instance and show you if you can launch a new instance without tags or not. So I've named these instances project integration and project automation because they already have project automation tag and project integration tag. So if I try to, stop the project automation instance, then it should allow me to stop it, and which works. So that means I have access. Um, if I try to do the same thing with the other instance, I won't be able to because that instance doesn't have the project automation tag, and it will throw error, which is great, which is how it's supposed to work. Now let me try launching a new instance. So launch instances, and I'm just going to pick the first one here. Whatever the default settings are, I will let everything be default for this to default. Now, just to show you that I won't be allowed to launch an instance without tags, I'm not going to add a tag. Security groups, I'm just going to pick the existing ones, which I already have in environment, so the default one, and I'm going to launch with the existing keypad. Yes, acknowledge, and launch, and it will fail. This failed because I didn't apply tag or the required tag, project tag automation. So let me go back to the tagging page and add a tag here. Project automation. Next, select the security groups, launch the default keypad, launch instances, and boom, works. Notice the moment I added a tag, the required tag, which was project automation, I was immediately allowed to launch a new instance. Now, let's do one thing. Let me go back to my admin user and let me sign out from here. Let me go back to my admin user and let me change the tag on the actual role. And then I will update the tag from project automation to project integration and then see if I can actually access the instance which I already created. And ideally, I should be denied because the tags don't match. So I log in again and I go to IAM. I will go to my role. The first role I have is ABAC 2. I go to the tag section. As you can see, I already have project automation tag. Edit the tag, and I will change automation to integration. And just to show you what uh, tags the EC2 instances have, real quick, I go to EC2, and then I go to the instances which are running right now. And this is the one that we just created, and it should it has the project automation tag. And then this is the one with uh, project integration tag. You can see project integration. All right. So I will log back in as Bob and assume the role again. And then I see I'll show you that now I won't be allowed to access the instance with automation, but when I try to access the instance with project integration, I'll be allowed. Going in as Bob, and then I will assume the role which we assumed earlier. This was the ABAC from the role history, ABAC EC2 role. And I will quickly go to the EC2 console, look at the instances. And first, I will try to access the instance which I just created with the project automation tag. So I will try to stop that instance, and it should fail because I don't have the appropriate tag. And if I go to the project integration instance, I should be able to stop it because now my tag is project integration on the principal as well. Stop. It worked. So as you can see, when you have ABAC in place, things become a lot easier for you to apply in your organization because the permissions are now based on tags, and all you have to do is update your tags or add new things with tags so that your permissions apply automatically in your environment. All right, I will go back to my presentation now. All right, so what are the ABAC best practices that you can take back with you from this session? So the first one is you only want to allow approved entities in your organization to set or modify attributes. By this, I mean that only trusted administrators who should have permissions to change critical things or change security settings should be able to update your attributes for access control. Everybody else should not have update permissions. And the way you can do that is using service control policies. So here's a sample service control policy which I created. You can apply to your account or an OU or an organization. And you can basically say that only a specific individual or individuals get permissions to modify those tags. Everybody else are denied. So in this particular policy, the critical things to see are the ones highlighted in yellow. So the effect is deny because I'm using granular SCPs with conditions. So you have to use a deny at the top as effect. And the actions in the action block, you will list your tagging APIs. So as an example for this particular policy, I'm using the tagging APIs for IAM and EC2. And what this does is it's denying these actions to all principles but the one listed in the condition. Because notice the action is deny these actions, and the condition says string not equals, and the principal on condition key where you specify your principal on. So anybody who's not this principal will be denied these actions. So for example, if I change this username to my username, Sulai, and I put my account ID here, what that means is only Sulai in my organization or account or OU, wherever you apply this policy, will be allowed to perform IAM tag role, IAM untag role, create tags and delete tags. Everybody else will be denied. So this is a very good way of controlling who can update tags. It's a good way of making your tags semi-immutable and only allowing certain principals access to change tags. The next best practice is I mentioned earlier, reserve a subset of attributes for access control. You want to make sure that now, because attributes are security primitives, they are for access control, they are separate from the attributes you use for cluster location and discovery. Third is tag everything during creation, so permissions apply automatically. This is very important. Otherwise, your admin will have to go back and see every single resource you created, every single account to make sure that everything is tagged. Otherwise, nobody will be able to access that particular resource if your permissions are only based on attributes. Rely on attributes to grant permissions to manage resources. For ABAC, this is a must. If you want your permissions to automatically apply as you scale, as in when you add users or resources in your organization, then you want to make sure your permissions are based on attributes. And finally, In spite of me telling you that you want to make sure that everything is created upon, if everything is tagged upon creation, you still want to periodically audit because you may encounter certain services that don't support tag on create. Unfortunately, there are a few services which don't, and you you won't be able to enforce your developers to apply tags there. Those services are working actively to make sure those things work with tag on create and tag based auth. But for any service which doesn't support tag on create today, you might want to go and periodically audit to ensure that wherever resources are being created for those services, they have tags so that you can access those resources based on. All right, and finally, I have the resources section. These are some documentation links, some blog links, which you can definitely use or refer to before you go and implement your ABAC permissions model. So the first one is the ABAC documentation page. This is actually a very, very new page that we just published a few weeks ago in our documentation section under IAM, where we make you understand what ABAC is, what the benefits are, and then ultimately we have an ABAC tutorial where you can actually understand how ABAC would look like the real service, a real world example. And then you also have these couple of blogs. The first one, which I wrote when we launched, IAM principal tagging last year, it has few sample policies for ABAC, and our developer evangelist Michael Chen wrote another blog where you can understand how specific uh, services work with ABAC. And finally, as I promised earlier on, we have a central repository of all actions, resources, and conditions for all services, which you can refer to on a service by service basis, which is our doc page. So this is a link to the doc page, and that will be super useful when you are going and authoring permission policies in IAM. So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the session and you learned more about what ABAC is in AWS. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me now.